Tony, 2-ton Galento wasn't born a gangster, and he sure as hell wasn't born a boxer either. He was born mad. Mad at the world, mad at his drunk old man, mad at being broke, and mad that life never gave him nothing without a fight. They said his fists were made for breaking things, doors, jaws, and dreams, and that his stomach had room for a keg and 2 slabs of steak. He wasn't cut from the cloth of champions. No, he was stitched together with spit, beer foam, and concrete. He grew up in Newark, Jersey, down in the kind of neighborhood where rats had more rights than the kids. His mother ran numbers for the local mob when she wasn't getting beat down by his father, and his first boxing lessons came from dodging a belt buckle midair. They say the ring saved a lot of kids, but for Tony, the ring was just a place where you could legally beat someone half to death and get paid for it. That suited him just fine. By the time he was 18, Tony had fists like anvils and a reputation that followed him like cigar smoke. They called him 2-ton, not because he weighed that much, though the guy was built like a brick shithouse, but because he hit like a damn freight train and drank like a battleship. The Mafia noticed. And when the mob notices you, it ain't always a compliment. Vinny Spadino, local capo for the Moretti family, came to watch Tony fight in a basement joint off 6th Street. No gloves, no rules, just blood and bets. Tony beat a guy twice his size till his face looked like soup. Vinny lit a cigar, looked over at his bodyguard and said, "That one, he fights like a damn gorilla. Sign him." Tony didn't ask questions. He started fighting in fixed matches for the family, mostly to rack up money and keep their enemies humiliated. He'd throw a fight if they told him, break a guy's leg if they asked, and kiss a judge's ring if the price was right. He got used to being their dog, a mean, wild one who only listened when the leash was yanked hard. But Tony wasn't stupid. He knew they were using him. He just didn't care. As long as the whiskey was flowing, the girls were around, and the bets kept rolling, he was fine being the goon in the shadows. Until one day, he decided he wanted something more. That something more came in the form of a newspaper. It was lying on a bar counter soaked in beer and covered in ash. But right there, in big black letters, was a headline that made his blood boil. Joe Louis defends title. Calls gangsters in boxing parasites. Tony read it 3 times, then once more. Joe Louis, the brown bomber, world heavyweight champion, the pride of clean boxing, had taken a shot at guys like Tony, called them a disease in the sport, filth, corrupt meatheads who didn't belong in the ring. Tony didn't take kindly to insults, especially not from someone who had never been in a back alley fight or had to wipe blood off his boots after a message went too far. He slammed the paper down, drained his whiskey, and growled to no one in particular. "I'm gonna fight that son of a bitch, and I ain't throwing this one." People laughed. They thought it was the whiskey talking. But when Tony said he was going to do something, it wasn't a joke. He meant it. The word spread fast. 2-ton was calling out Joe Louis, clean-cut, poster boy, never been touched by the mob Joe Louis. Reporters thought it was a stunt. The Mafia thought it was suicide. Even Vinny told him, "You sure you want to make noise like that? The family's got good money in this clean image crap." But Tony didn't care. He had spent years being the guy who got paid to fall. Now, he wanted to stand. He wanted to stand in front of the whole damn country and show them what a parasite could do when he wasn't taking a dive. But he forgot one thing. In this world, in the world of mob money, dirty boxing, and backroom deals, you don't get to dream unless someone owns it. And Tony? Tony was about to find out just how deep the mob's hooks went, even deeper than his fists. People talk about courage like it's some golden light that comes from deep inside, like a holy flame. But for Tony, courage was a bottle of rye, a busted nose, and the fact that he didn't give a damn if he lived or died. That's the kind of courage that scares people, the kind that comes from having nothing left to lose. After his outburst in the bar, word got around fast. Fast enough that by the next morning, 2 guys in black suits and matching frowns showed up at his apartment. They knocked twice, hard and cold, like the door owed them money. Tony opened it shirtless, belly hanging over his boxers, cigarette dangling from his lip. "Tony Galento?" the taller one said, already annoyed. "You want an autograph or a punch in the teeth?" Tony growled, rubbing his eyes. "We're here on behalf of Mr. Spadino." Tony exhaled smoke in their direction. "Tell Vinny I said go screw himself, and if he don't like it, he knows where to find me." The second man stepped forward, reached into his coat, and for a second, Tony thought it was a gun. His shoulders tensed, but the guy only pulled out an envelope. He held it out like it was poison. Tony took it. Heavy, probably cash. He opened it with one finger and thumb, like he was handling a rat. Inside, $5,000 in crisp bills, and a note. "We're proud of you, champ. Let's talk. V. Spadino." Tony snorted. $5,000 to shut up. $5,000 to back off the idea of challenging Joe Louis. He crumpled the envelope, threw it on the floor, and slammed the door shut. 2 days later, he was sitting across from Vinny Spadino in the back of a steakhouse that reeked of garlic and secrets. The walls were wood-paneled, and the lights were dim enough to hide the bloodstains that never washed out. Vinny was cutting into a rare steak like it insulted his mother. "You know how much I like you, Tony," Vinny said without looking up. "You're a good earner. You stay in your lane. You do what we ask. You never rat. Solid guy, solid chin, thick skull." "Get to it," Tony muttered. Vinny finally looked up, eyes cold and amused. "You're embarrassing us." Tony leaned back, arms crossed. "Because I want a real fight?" "Because you don't know how this game works anymore," Vinny snapped. "Joe Louis, he's untouchable. The whole world loves him. Sponsors, newspapers, politicians. Clean guy, great story. Black but not too black, if you get my meaning. You don't touch him unless the commission says it's okay. And the commission don't move unless we move them." Tony shrugged. "So move them." Vinny leaned in. "You think I'm going to push my chips to back you? You're a brawler, a drunk. You've never followed the script once. And now, you want to go legit? That ain't how this business works." Tony's eyes narrowed. "I'm not asking for your blessing, Vinny." "No," Vinny said, pointing with his fork. "You're trying to start a fire without knowing who owns the goddamn matches." They sat in silence. The waiter came and left like a ghost. Finally, Tony said, "You done?" Vinny chuckled. "Not yet. I'm offering you a deal." "Oh yeah?" $10,000 cash, 3 fights in Cuba. We fix the books, you win all 3. Walk away with clean stats, nice purse. Forget this Joe Louis nonsense." Tony wiped his mouth and stood up. "I'm fighting him, Vinny. With or without you." Vinny's voice followed him like a knife. "Then I hope you like sleeping with one eye open. The thing about trying to go clean when you're dirty is, no one believes you." Tony started calling promoters, journalists, anyone who'd pick up the phone. Most didn't. Some laughed. 1 or 2 told him flat out, "You ain't getting near that ring, 2-ton. You're poison." So he went to the one guy who owed him, Tommy Fletch. Tommy was a boxing trainer turned manager, an old-school guy who once coached a welterweight that bit off another guy's ear mid-match. He lived in a dusty gym above a dry cleaning joint in Queens. The place smelled like sweat and broken dreams. When Tony walked in, Tommy was wrapping a kid's hands, scolding him gently for having brittle wrists. "Jesus Christ," Tommy muttered when he saw Tony. "I thought you were dead or in Jersey, which is the same thing." Tony grinned. "Miss me?" "No." Tony sat down on a bench. "I need a shot, Tommy." Tommy laughed. "What, you trying to fight again? I thought you were a full-time mob mascot now." "I want Joe Louis." Tommy blinked. "Say that again without sounding stupid." "I want him in the ring. I want a real shot." Tommy leaned on the ropes. "You're nuts. He'll kill you. And even if you had a chance, in which you don't, the commission would never allow it. They'll allow it if you push for it. If you say I'm training legit." Tommy scoffed. "They know you're dirty. Then make me clean." Tommy looked at him for a long time. Finally, he said, "This ain't gonna end pretty?" Tony grinned. "When has it ever?" Training began the next week. No booze, no girls, no backroom deals, just sweat, pain, and fists slamming into leather till they bled. Tony was 32. In boxing years, that was ancient. His legs were slower, his gut hung heavy, and his reflexes were dulled by years of whiskey and war. But his heart, That stupid, bull-headed gangster heart was beating stronger than ever. Tommy worked him like a dog. Mornings started before sunrise, road work, weights, sparring. By noon, Tony was soaked in sweat and cursing everything, including the floor. By evening, he was asleep before his head hit the pillow. But something was changing. He was trimming down. His punches were getting sharper. He stopped gasping after a few rounds. The animal in him, the one the mob kept caged for years, was waking up. And then the threat started. At first, it was small. A brick through the gym window, a dead rat nailed to his locker. Then came the phone calls. No words, just breathing. Tommy was furious. "They're trying to scare you." Tony just shrugged. "Let him try harder." But it wasn't long before it got real. One night, after a late run, Tony returned to his apartment and found the door slightly open. He stepped in slow, cautious, heart steady. Place was wrecked. Drawers open, mattress slashed, photos torn off the walls. But the real message was in the bathroom mirror, scrawled in red paint, "Stay in your lane, 2 ton." Tony stared at it for a long time. Then he lit a cigarette, took a drag, and muttered, "Looks like I'm on the right road." By the time whispers of the potential fight reached the press, it was too big to ignore. 2 ton was serious. He was training, he was clean, and he was calling out Joe Louis on every damn radio show that had let him speak. Public opinion was split. Some said he was a washed-up thug looking for attention. Others, they were curious. Could the dirty brawler from Jersey really stand a chance against the champion? Could street smarts beat technique? Could brutality beat grace? Even Joe Louis was asked about it during a press conference. He chuckled and said, "I don't fight clowns." Tony heard that and smiled. Then let's see if he laughs when he's spitting teeth. But the mob wasn't done. Vinny Spadino called again. This time, he wasn't calm. "You think this makes you a hero?" Vinny snapped. "You think the world loves a reformed killer? You're a freak show, Tony. A pit bull wearing a tuxedo." Tony didn't flinch. "You had your chance to help me. Now get out of my way." Vinny's voice dropped, cold and smooth. "You think you're going to walk into that ring? We own the venue. We own the ref. Hell, we own the guy who sells popcorn." Tony smiled. "Then I guess I'll just have to knock your guy out so hard, no ref can stop it." Vinny hung up. And Tony knew, next time, it wouldn't be a rat or a broken mirror. It'd be a bullet. 1 week later, they tried. Tony was walking back from a late spar when a black Packard pulled up across the street. Headlights stayed off. 2 guys in coats stepped out, fast and smooth. Tony heard them before he saw them. Street instincts never die. He ducked just as the first shot cracked through the night. The bullet missed his head by inches and punched into a street lamp. The second guy aimed, but Tony was already charging. He slammed into the nearest thug, knocking the pistol from his hand, and drove a left hook into his jaw so hard the guy hit the pavement like a sack of bones. The second man hesitated just long enough. Tony tackled him. Fists flying, rage pouring out. By the time the cops arrived, Tony was standing over both of them, breathing hard, blood on his fists, face lit by flashing lights. At the hospital, a young reporter snuck in while Tony got stitched up. "You gonna cancel the fight?" the kid asked. Tony looked up, one eye swollen, lip split. "You ever seen a lion back down from a dog?" The kid blinked. Tony grinned. "Didn't think so." The gunshot wound wasn't his, but the message was. Loud and damn clear. Tony sat in the hospital bed, a bandage across his forehead, knuckles still scabbed, left rib bruised from diving into the pavement. They hadn't come to scare him this time. They came to end it. End him. Tommy Fletch stood in the corner, arms folded, eyes filled with a quiet panic he didn't bother hiding anymore. "They're not playing, Tony. This ain't bricks through windows or dead rats. They want you cold." Tony spat into a trash can, blood mixed with bile. "Then they should have sent better shooters." Tommy didn't laugh. "This ain't a joke, kid. You walk out of this room and keep training. They'll try again. Next time it won't be sloppy." Tony turned to him slowly. "You walk into that ring, Tommy. You walk alone. That's what you taught me. You want to quit? Walk out now. But I ain't quitting. Not for them. Not for anyone. Tommy cursed under his breath, took off his cap, ran a hand through thinning hair. You're a stubborn son of a bitch, you know that? Tony smirked. Takes one to train one. 3 days later, Tony was back in the gym, bandaged, bruised, and slow on his feet. But there, every step on the mat echoed with defiance. The gym had emptied out since the hit attempt. Nobody wanted to be collateral damage. Even the old-timers stopped dropping by. No one wanted to get caught in the crossfire of a war between a rogue boxer and the Moretti family. Tommy didn't speak much that week. He just trained Tony harder than ever. If you're gonna die in that ring, he said gruffly, you better die standing. Tony didn't argue. He was used to pain. What scared him was silence. And lately, the streets had gone too quiet, like the calm before a funeral. Meanwhile, the press couldn't get enough. 2-ton targeted in mob shooting attempt. Galento's path to Louis, bloodied but unbowed. From enforcer to underdog, can Galento go legit? Every newspaper from Newark to Chicago was talking about him. Radio hosts were debating whether he was a hero or a lunatic. Sports writers called it the most dangerous comeback in boxing history. Tony didn't care about headlines, but what he did care about was that Joe Louis finally responded. It came in the form of a wire quote. If he makes it to the ring, I'll be there. I don't back down from a fight, but I don't celebrate violence outside the ropes. I fight boxers, not killers. Tony read it over and over, eyes narrowed. He still thinks I'm scum, he muttered. Tommy glanced at the quote, then back at Tony. So prove him wrong. Getting licensed wasn't easy. The boxing commission hated everything Tony represented. The mob ties, the fixed fights, the bar brawls, the bodies in alleyways. But the public wanted blood. The promoters wanted cash. And the media, they wanted war. So after weeks of lobbying, bribes, and endless interviews, the commission folded. Tony Galento was cleared to fight Joe Louis. Date set, posters printed, tickets sold out in 3 days. They were calling it the Battle for Boxing Soul. One was a champion, clean and elegant, the embodiment of discipline. The other, a street brawler with mob scars and bad intentions. And every damn soul wanted to see which one would fall. But the Moretti family wasn't done. 2 weeks before the fight, Vinny Spadino showed up in person. Tony was at the gym, working the bag until the leather split when he heard the footsteps behind him. He turned, saw the slick hair, silk suit, and shark smile. Mind if I watch, champ? Vinny asked, voice smooth like ice melting over a knife. Tony wiped sweat from his brow, didn't answer. Vinny stepped closer. You made quite the show, Galento. Papers love you. Radio can't stop talking. You're a walking headline, a circus act. Tony dropped his gloves. What do you want? Vinny smiled. What I always wanted. Control. You lost that the second you tried to put me in the ground. Wrong, Vinny said softly. That was me trying to teach you respect. But maybe I came at it the wrong way. So here's a new offer. He opened a small folder and slid it across the table. Tony picked it up, eyes scanning the papers. $2 million, Vinny said. All in offshore accounts, all yours, tax-free. Win or lose, doesn't matter. Tony raised an eyebrow. What's the catch? Vinny stepped closer, his voice dropping. You go 12 rounds, that's it. No knockouts, no surprises. You play it close, make it look good, but don't touch him hard. The commission's watching. The feds are watching. We just want a safe little drama. You make your payday. He keeps his belt. Everybody wins. Tony stared at the contract. Then he tore it in half. Vinny's smile vanished. You're really this stupid? Tony leaned in, close enough to smell the cologne. I didn't crawl out of hell to dance for you again. You want 12 rounds? You better pray he lasts that long. Vinny's jaw tensed. You're making enemies you won't see coming. Tony walked past him, picked up his gloves. Good, he said. Let him try. I don't sleep much anyway. The night before the fight, it rained in New York. The city felt like it was holding its breath. The streets were slick, neon lights reflecting in puddles like broken mirrors. Tony sat alone in a cheap hotel room, staring at a picture of his ma. She died years ago. Cancer, poverty, and broken promises. But she always said he was meant for more. "You ain't a good man, Tony," she once whispered, "but you got a good fight in you. Don't waste it on dirt." He poured himself a drink, then stopped. He looked at the bottle, at his bandaged knuckles, at the old scars across his chest, and he poured the whiskey down the sink. Fight day. Madison Square Garden was packed, every seat taken. Celebrities, gangsters, sports legends, senators, all there. The air was thick with cigar smoke, sweat, and tension. Backstage, Tony sat quietly while Tommy wrapped his hands. No music, no words. Just the steady tug and pull of tape against skin. "You nervous?" Tommy asked. Tony cracked his neck. "Not about the fight." Tommy looked up. "Then what?" Tony stared at his reflection in the mirror. "About what happens if I win." Tommy smirked. "Then worry about that after you win." They called him out first. From Newark, New Jersey, weighing 235 pounds. Tony, 2-ton Galento. Booze mixed with cheers. Some fans loved the rebel. Others wanted to see him humiliated. Tony didn't care. He walked to the ring like he'd walked through every back alley in Jersey, unbothered, unbreakable, and 2 steps from swinging. Then came the champ. And now, the reigning heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Louis. The crowd roared. Flashbulbs popped. Joe walked out with grace, gloves glinting, eyes calm. He didn't even look at Tony, but Tony never took his eyes off him. The bell hadn't even rung, and Tony was already in a fight. Joe Louis was fast, faster than anyone Tony had ever faced. First round, Tony swung heavy and missed. Joe countered with a jab that snapped Tony's head back like a slingshot. The crowd roared. Tony grunted. "All right," he muttered, "so that's how it's going to be." Second round, same thing. Joe danced, Tony chased. Joe struck like lightning, clean and clinical. But by the third round, Tony started smiling. He liked pain, it cleared his head. Made everything simple. You hit, you get hit. The fourth round, Tony landed a left hook. Not clean, but enough to shake Joe's rhythm. Enough to see a flash of doubt in the champ's eyes. Tony grinned through bloodied teeth. But in the fifth, something changed. Joe hesitated. Just a half second. Long enough for Tony to smell it. Fear. He surged. Left hook, right to the ribs, uppercut that rattled teeth. Joe backed up, gloves up, stunned. The crowd gasped. Tony had landed hard. And Joe Louis was bleeding. Joe Louis was bleeding. The champion, the icon, the man who stood like a marble statue of perfection inside the ring, now had blood trickling from his nose and the corner of his mouth. And it wasn't from a headbutt. It wasn't from an accident. Tony had made him bleed, and the whole damn garden saw it. The crowd was stunned. Reporters in the front row leaned forward, mouths open, pencils frozen in midair. The gamblers, the smart ones, started panicking. Tony wasn't supposed to make it this far. He wasn't supposed to land on the champ. But Tony didn't care about odds. He cared about one thing: hurting the man who thought he was untouchable. Round 6. Joe came out like a man with a point to prove. His footwork tightened, eyes sharper. He wasn't smiling anymore. No more gliding around like a dancer. This time, he was hunting. And Tony knew it. He kept his gloves up, elbows in, absorbing the blows. Joe's fists hit like hammers now. Clean jabs to the temple, crisp hooks to the ribs, snapping uppercuts that threatened to lift him off his damn feet. Tony stumbled once, almost went down, but caught himself on instinct. The world blurred. The lights above the ring swam in and out of focus. His knees buckled. His lungs screamed. But something deeper than muscle, deeper than bone, kept him standing. Pride. Not the kind you brag about. The kind that burns quietly, deep in your gut, and tells you that you'll die before you let them win. Tony waited, crouched, letting Joe empty his clip. Then he fired back. A left hook that clipped Joe's chin. A right that caught his shoulder and pushed him off balance. The bell rang before either man could finish what they started. They returned to their corners, breathing hard. Tommy leaned over Tony, dumping water over his neck. "You good?" he asked, eyes scanning the damage. Tony nodded slowly. Feels like I got hit by a truck. You did, Tommy muttered, and the truck wants another round. Tony spat blood into a bucket. Let him come. I'll eat the fender next time. Tommy smirked despite himself. Crazy bastard. Tony smiled. That's what you love about me. Meanwhile, back in the stands, Vinny Spadino wasn't smiling. He sat in the third row, flanked by two gorillas in suits, watching with a face like stone. The cigar in his mouth was burning down too fast, and his jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. Too close, he whispered. Too goddamn close. One of the goons leaned in. You want us to pull the plug? Vinny shook his head. Too late for that. If we pull him now, we'll be the ones that look dirty. No, let him finish. Let Joe crush him. He looked up at the ring and muttered, He doesn't get to walk away a hero. Round 7. Tony's legs felt heavier. His vision was narrowing. Every breath dragged through fire. But he kept moving. Not fast, not pretty, but enough. Joe was still cleaner, still faster. But something was different. Joe was frustrated. He'd landed clean hits that would have knocked other men into the ER. But Tony kept coming. Like a drunk bear in a bar fight, he stumbled, roared, and swung like he had nothing to lose. Because he didn't. And Joe? Joe had everything to lose. Midway through the round, Tony landed a vicious right to Joe's ribs. It made the champ grunt, first sound he'd made all night. Tony followed it up with a wild overhand left that grazed Joe's ear. The crowd gasped again. 2 ton was turning the tide. Joe countered with a body shot that damn near folded Tony in half. But Tony smiled through it, blood on his teeth, madness in his eyes. Come on, pretty boy, he hissed. Give me a reason to stay down. By the end of the round, the judges were confused. Joe had landed more punches, cleaner punches, but Tony had made more noise, more damage. The crowd couldn't take their eyes off him. This wasn't the script. This was a war. Back in his corner, Tommy was shaking his head. You're nuts, you know that? Tony blinked through a swollen eye. We established that in round 3. Tommy poured water down his chest. You could play it safe, dance, block, take the loss, and survive. Tony grabbed his wrist. I didn't come here to survive. Tommy stared at him and nodded. Round 8. This was where most guys cracked. Most guys faded under the heat, under the pressure. But Tony, he thrived on chaos. He came out swinging, sloppy but strong. Joe danced, ducked, but Tony cornered him once, just for a second, and landed a flurry. Left, right, left again. Joe's head snapped back. Blood sprayed from his nose. The crowd erupted. Tony chased him into the ropes, throwing haymakers, eyes wide with rage. But Joe wasn't the champ for nothing. With one perfect counter, he slipped a punch and drilled Tony with a right cross so clean it sounded like a gunshot. Tony dropped, flat on his back. The crowd screamed. Tommy jumped halfway into the ring. The ref started counting. 1, 2, 3. Tony's eyes fluttered. 4, 5. He blinked. He heard the roar. He saw the lights above him. 6. He rolled onto his side. 7. He got one knee up. 8. He was standing, beaten, bloodied, but not broken. Joe stared at him across the ring, confused, impressed, maybe even a little afraid, because Tony didn't know when to quit. Round 9 was slower, both men gasping now. Joe still scoring points, Tony still throwing bombs. No finesse left, just survival and pride. Vinny was sweating through his suit now. This wasn't supposed to happen, he muttered. His goon whispered, should we make the call? Vinny didn't answer. He just stared at Tony and shook his head. He's already a legend now, he said. Even if he dies in that ring, he wins. Round 10. Tony's vision was gone in one eye. His ribs ached like broken glass. His legs wobbled with every step, but he refused to stop. Joe kept jabbing, cutting angles, staying ahead, but he wasn't smiling. He wasn't dancing. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a statement. Tony grunted through clenched teeth. Is this what a clean champ looks like? Joe fired back with a right hook. Tony caught it on his shoulder and landed one of his own. Both men stumbled, and for one glorious second, the crowd stood still. Two warriors, bloodied, battered, exhausted, staring each other down, both still standing. Bell. Back in the corner, Tommy looked pale. "You got 2 rounds left," he said. "You need a miracle to win." Tony leaned back, chest heaving. "I am the miracle." Tommy didn't smile this time. Round 11. Tony came out slow. Too slow. Joe smelled weakness and attacked hard. Fast, furious, a combination that would have ended anyone else, but Tony rolled with it, absorbed what he could, and fought back. The round was brutal. Pure violence. No strategy, just willpower. No knockdowns, just punishment. By the time the 12th round bell rang, the arena was thunderous. No one knew what was happening anymore. Scorecards were a mess. Everyone had an opinion, but no one could predict the end. Tommy looked at Tony like a man watching a storm that wouldn't stop. "You still want this?" Tony stared at him. "You still asking stupid questions?" Tommy gave him a nod. "Then go die a legend, 2-ton." Tony stepped out for the final round, like a man walking to his own execution. Joe Louis waited. Still strong, still fast, but no longer invincible. The round was hell. Joe attacked first, snapping punches, moving sharp. Tony took them, all of them, and returned fire. The crowd was on its feet. Tony landed a left hook. Joe answered with a right. Tony landed a body shot. Joe hit him with a jab that split his eyebrow open. Blood poured. They kept going. The ref circled like a hawk waiting for the collapse, but neither man fell. Not in the 12th. Not yet. Then, with 10 seconds left, Tony did something no one expected. He dropped his gloves, just for a second, and motioned Joe forward. "Hit me!" he growled. Joe hesitated. "Hit me like you mean it." Joe lunged, and Tony moved. One last punch. A wild, desperate uppercut. It landed. Joe's head snapped back. He staggered, and then, the bell. Tony dropped to his knees. Not knocked out, just done. The ring exploded in noise. Trainers rushed in, medics, cameras flashing. The ref grabbed both men's wrists. The crowd waited. Judges looked terrified. The announcer stepped into the ring. In a unanimous decision, the arena held its breath. The winner and still heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Louis. The crowd roared. Joe raised a fist, barely. Tony just smiled, because even in defeat, he had won. He'd stood 12 rounds against the best in the world. He'd made the mob sweat. He'd made the world watch. And most of all, he'd done it clean. The applause was thunder, the kind that rattles your bones even if you're flat on your back. But Tony wasn't on his back. Not yet. He was on his knees, breathing through bloodied lips, shoulders sagging, body shaking like a crumbling building. His left eye was completely shut now. The cut above his brow had split open in the final round, and the blood hadn't stopped since. Still, he grinned. He wasn't champion. He knew that. The decision had gone to Joe Louis, and rightfully so. But Tony had stood the full 12, and in the boxing world, especially coming from where he did, that was a miracle. Joe Louis, bruised and battered, walked over, extended a glove. Tony took it, and Joe pulled him to his feet. "You're tougher than they said," Joe said, eyes locked on Tony's. Tony wheezed. "And you hit softer than my mother." Joe chuckled. "Just once." Then he turned, raised Tony's hand with his. The crowd exploded. Because this wasn't just a fight. It was a statement that even a gangster, a man with dirt on his hands and blood on his soul, could claw his way into the light, if only for one night. The press had a field day. 12 rounds of redemption. Tony 2-ton Galento, from enforcer to everyman. Louis wins, but Galento steals the show. Photographs of the post-fight handshake made the front page of every major paper in the country. Sports writers called it a fight for the ages. Fans flooded bars and diners talking about the brawler from Jersey who almost shocked the world. Even people who'd once crossed the street to avoid Tony now nodded respectfully when they passed him. He was still rough around the edges, still cursed too loud and drank too hard. But he was no longer a footnote. He was a man who had earned his place in the story. But in the shadows, behind the noise and the headlines, Vinny Spadino seethed. He sat in a leather chair in the back of a dimly lit club, tie loosened, jaw clenched so tight it looked like his teeth would snap. The fight was over, and the Moretti family had lost more than just money. They'd lost control. Tony had humiliated them, not with words, not with violence, but by ignoring them, by going clean, by making the mob look weak. That was the one sin they couldn't forgive. "He made fools of us," Vinny growled. Across the table, Benny Ragusa, one of the enforcers who'd botched the hit weeks earlier, shifted nervously. "We still got options, boss." Vinny's eyes narrowed. "Do we?" He poured himself a drink, didn't sip it, just stared into it. "He got famous for bleeding in public," Vinny said, "but let's see how he looks when he bleeds in the dark." Meanwhile, Tony was healing. He spent a week in the hospital. Stitches, painkillers, silence. Every inch of him hurt. Breathing was like swallowing glass. His left eye would never fully open again, at least not the way it used to. But he didn't complain. He just lay there, letting time pass. Watching sunlight crawl across the ceiling, reporters kept asking for interviews. He turned most of them down. When one young kid snuck into the hospital room, notebook shaking in his hands, Tony looked at him, smiled, and said, "I'm tired of talking. Write whatever the hell you want." The kid published a piece called "The Man Who Refused to Fall." Tony never read it, didn't have to. He lived it. One morning, Tommy walked in with a paper bag and a crooked smile. "Brought you bagels," he said. "Don't say I never loved you." Tony sat up slowly, groaning. "They got whiskey in them." "No," Tommy said, "but I can bring a bottle next time." He tossed the bag on the bed, then sat in the corner chair, quiet for a while. Finally he said, "They're not happy, you know." Tony didn't look at him. "The Morettis," Tommy nodded. "You made them look weak. You went legit right in their faces and didn't lose ugly enough for their liking." Tony bit into a bagel. "Then maybe they should have trained harder." Tommy didn't laugh. "Tony, you sure you're ready for what comes next?" Tony looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "No." Then he smiled. "But I wasn't ready for Joe Louis either." After the hospital, Tony went back to Newark. Same neighborhood, same tiny apartment above the butcher shop. The place hadn't changed. Paint still peeling, pipes still whining like ghosts at night, but something inside Tony had shifted. He didn't walk like a gangster anymore, didn't speak like a muscle for hire. There was a weight to him now, not just in his body, but in his presence. Kids started following him around, asking questions. "Did you really hit Joe Louis in the jaw? Did it hurt when he knocked you down? Can you teach me to fight?" Tony started going to the gym again, not to train, just to move, to breathe, to remind his body it was still alive. Sometimes he'd train a few of the kids, show them how to stand, how to punch, how not to get killed in their first street brawl. And other times, when he was alone, he'd stare at the ring, remembering the roar of the crowd, the sting of every punch, the one moment he felt like more than just muscle. But the silence didn't last. One night, as he was walking home from the gym, two men in coats stepped out from behind a dumpster. Tony didn't flinch. "Spadino?" he asked casually. The first man nodded. "He's not happy." Tony lit a cigarette. "He can get in line." The second man pulled a blade. "You should have stayed in your lane." Tony didn't back up. He flicked the cigarette, stepped forward, and said, "You sure you want to do this?" They lunged, but they forgot who they were dealing with. Even bruised, even scarred, even slower than he once was, Tony was still a fighter. The first guy went down after one headbutt. The second got a rib broken for his trouble. When the cops showed up, Tony was sitting on the curb, smoking again. He nodded at the bodies. "Tell Vinny I'm still breathing," he muttered. "Might want to try harder next time." Tommy was furious when he found out. "You're poking the goddamn bear, Tony. They won't stop now. You embarrassed them. You're walking around like you got nothing to fear, but they'll come harder. They'll come louder." Tony looked at him and said, "Let 'em." And that's when Tommy understood. Tony wasn't fearless. He was done being afraid. Then came the offer. It arrived in the form of a letter, no return address, just typed words on white paper. Leave Jersey, 1 week, go west. Vegas will welcome you, stay, and you bleed. Tony read it once, then lit it on fire. But the warning wasn't idle. That Sunday, the gym caught fire. Middle of the night, flames tore through the place like it owed them money. By the time the fire truck showed up, half the building was ash. The ring was gone. The equipment melted. Tony showed up the next morning, stared at the smoke rising into the gray sky, and didn't say a word. Tommy stood beside him, fists clenched. "This is war," he said. Tony nodded slowly. "No," he whispered. "This is payback." The gym was still smoldering when the sun came up. Smoke curled into the morning air like ghosts from a war long over, but not forgotten. The boxing ring was gone, reduced to ash and blackened steel. The walls charred, the old punching bags melted into the floor like wax. What was left of the locker room hung in tatters, the smell of gasoline and betrayal thick in the air. Tony stood at the edge of it all, hands in his coat pockets, jaw clenched tight. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared, like a man looking at the grave of someone he'd loved but never said it to out loud. Tommy was pacing behind him, voice rough, eyes wild. "This was it, Tony. This was our place, our history. My old man trained in this building. You bled in this building. We rebuilt you in this building. And now they just burned it?" Tony didn't move. "Yeah." Tommy kicked a metal bench, sent it clanging across the pavement. "What now? You gonna wait for them to torch your apartment next? What's it gonna take for you to hit back, huh?" Tony finally turned. "Oh, I'm gonna hit back," he said. "I just ain't figured out who deserves it most yet." 2 nights later, Tony went to church. That alone would have been strange enough. Him walking into holy ground like a wolf wearing a halo. But what was even stranger? He wasn't there to pray. He found Father Mancini in the back pew, smoking a cigarette like he'd lost a bet with God. "You look like hell," the priest said without looking at him. "I'm on a streak," Tony replied. Father Mancini exhaled. "You come here to confess?" Tony chuckled. "Too late for that. I came to remember who I used to be." The priest raised an eyebrow. "And who's that?" Tony stared at the cross above the altar. "The guy they should have killed when they had the chance." The next morning, Tony made a call. Then another, then 10 more. Old numbers, old favors, people who hadn't heard from him in years, guys who thought he was either dead or too famous to care anymore. But Tony remembered every single one. By nightfall, word had gone out. Tony 2-Ton Galento was calling in his debts. The thing about the Moretti family was they were powerful, but they weren't invincible. They had soldiers, cash, politicians in their pocket, but they also had cracks, forgotten grudges, ex-enforcers they underpaid, bookies they stiffed, fighters they hung out to dry. And Tony was the guy all those misfits still respected, not because he was clean, not because he was nice, but because he never pretended to be anything other than what he was, brutal, honest, and loyal to those who didn't screw him over. That loyalty started to wake up old ghosts. One of the first to show up was Johnny Knuckles Parisi, a former enforcer with a limp and a grudge the size of a Buick. He'd done 3 years in Trenton for a job Vinny set him up on, and the family never paid his girl a dime while he was inside. Next came Miguel Rosario, a Cuban cut man who used to fix underground fights for the Morettis. They shorted him 15 grand on a medical bill and told him to sue the streets. By the 3rd day, Tony had 6 guys, then 9. By the end of the week, he had 17 men who wanted revenge more than they wanted peace, and that was enough. Tommy wasn't thrilled when he found out. "You're building a street army," he said, pacing in Tony's kitchen. "You're not just poking the bear anymore. You're walking into its cave with a match and a gas can." Tony poured 2 glasses of whiskey, slid one across the table. "This ain't boxing anymore, Tommy. This is war." Tommy stared at the glass. "And when this war ends..." Tony took a sip. "One of us disappears." The first hit was surgical. A Moretti stash house in Jersey, hidden behind a fake appliance store, guarded by 2 ex-cops and a doorman who didn't ask questions. Tony and Johnny Knuckles went in with 2 others, masks up, silence thick. They didn't take the money, didn't torch the place. They just left a message, a baseball bat, splintered, soaked in motor oil. Tony left it on the poker table in the back room. The next day, Vinny Spadino knew exactly who'd sent it. Retaliation came quick. Tony's cousin in Brooklyn, a guy who had nothing to do with the fight, found his car riddled with bullets. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. You touch us, we touch blood. Tony didn't blink. He made 3 more moves that week. A gambling den on 5th got sprayed with red paint. A Moretti-owned restaurant had its kitchen shut down by the health department, thanks to a mysterious tip. A high-level bagman woke up duct-taped to a chair in a warehouse, Tony leaning over him with a smile that meant business. You tell Vinny, Tony said, tapping the guy's cheek gently. He don't get to win this one. Meanwhile, the media started to notice something was off. Reporters sniffed around the gym fire, tried connecting it to Tony. Some even suggested the Moretti family had started the blaze. But no one could prove it. Not yet. Tony refused interviews, kept a low profile, but every time he showed up at a diner or bar, the people whispered. Some nodded, some stared. The kids who used to ask for autographs now asked him how to fight like him, not in the ring, but in life. You get back up, he'd say, no matter how many times they drop you. One night, Tommy sat across from him and said, "This ends 2 ways, Tony. You die. Or Vinny does. That's it." Tony lit a cigarette. I know. Tommy slammed his hand on the table. Then for once, just once, be smart. Go to the feds. Give them something. Let them clean it up. Tony exhaled smoke. I don't talk to rats, Tommy, even when they got shiny badges. Tommy stared at him. You're going to get yourself buried. Tony looked him dead in the eye. Then I'll dig my way out. Vinny Spadino was cornered now. His enforcers were spooked. His cash flow was slowing. His name, once spoken with fear, was starting to rot like old meat. He called a sit-down, one-on-one, neutral ground. Tony accepted. The meeting took place in the back room of an abandoned club near the docks. 2 chairs, 1 table, no weapons, no men, just them. Vinny poured 2 glasses of scotch, set one in front of Tony. Tony didn't touch it. Vinny leaned back. You made your point. Tony stared. Vinny continued, voice low. You humiliated me, cost me money, power, made me look like a fool in front of my own guys. Tony raised an eyebrow. I did that? Or did you do that by betting against me like I was still your dog? Vinny's face twitched, just once. You come from dirt, Tony. You think this little war makes you better than us? Tony leaned in, voice quiet. No, but it makes me free. Vinny slammed his hand on the table. This ends now. You walk away, disappear. I'll let you live. Tony stood slowly. You don't get to let me do anything. He turned, walked out. Vinny's voice followed him. This ain't over, Galento. Tony didn't look back. No, he said. It's just getting good. 3 nights after the sit-down with Vinny Spadino, the city felt colder. Not weather-wise. It was something else. Like the streets were holding their breath, waiting for the next body to drop. Tony knew the rules of the life. You go after a man like Vinny, you don't just piss him off. You pull the pin on a grenade and wait for the shrapnel. The sit-down hadn't been a truce. It was a warning disguised as diplomacy. And Tony had walked away from it like he always did, chin up, gloves on, daring the devil to swing first. But even he knew the next punch wouldn't be fair, or clean, or in daylight. He wasn't afraid, not for himself, but for the people around him. That was something else. It was a Thursday morning when he got the call. Tommy's voice came through the receiver, low and ragged. They hit her. Tony's gut turned. Who? Rosa, the waitress at Carmine's. The one who used to sneak you extra ribs after every fight. You remember? Tony closed his eyes. He did. She's in the hospital. Caught a stray when 2 goons lit up the diner last night. It was meant for someone else, probably me, maybe you. Didn't matter. They sprayed the place like it was a goddamn war zone. Tony didn't speak. Tommy continued, angry now. 3 other people hurt. A kid. An old man. A delivery guy who just got back from serving in Korea. This is what they're doing now, Tony. This is who they're hitting. Tony's voice was gravel. "Tell me where they are." "You think it matters?" "Tell me anyway." That night, Tony sat alone in a rented warehouse just outside the edge of town, one of the old ones, abandoned after the dock started dying. Rusted metal, busted windows, and enough shadows to swallow a man whole, the kind of place where secrets weren't just hidden, they were buried. Johnny Knuckles Parisi arrived just after midnight. He brought a folder thick with names, addresses, shift changes, bribes, all the Moretti men on the street, all the lieutenants running things while Vinny played king in the tower. "They ain't ghosts, Tony," Johnny said, tossing the file on the table. "They bleed just like us." Tony nodded. "I don't want them scared," he said quietly. "I want them gone." And so it began, the reckoning. The first was Frankie Fingers Lucetto, ran numbers in underground fights, loved to throw his weight around at dive bars. Tony found him playing pool in the back of a joint called Rusty's. No mask, no warning. Just walked in and broke both of Frankie's arms with a cue stick before whispering in his ear, "Tell Vinny, this was a mercy." Next came Salvatore Russo, bookie, pimp, and low-level earner. Tony didn't even bother showing up for that one. He just had one of the kids from the old gym, a wiry little bastard with more hate than sense, leave a Molotov on his doorstep at 3 a.m. Sal got out alive, but he left town that same night. The city started talking again. But this time, it wasn't Tony the boxer, it was Tony the ghost. No one saw him coming, but they all saw what he left behind. Vinny was losing face by the hour. His top earners either ran or turned to protection crews from out of town, a desperate, sloppy move. His men were starting to ask questions behind his back, and in the mob world, doubt was cancer. But even as the streets shook, Tony wasn't celebrating, because with every blow he delivered, something inside him cracked. He wasn't just fighting dirty now, he was living dirty again, kicking doors in, making threats, breaking bones. He'd started this war with some illusion of being different, better, reborn. But now, he felt like the man he used to be, the one who got paid to hurt people and didn't blink when blood hit the floor. One night, after roughing up a guy outside a poker house, Tony looked down at his fists, swollen, red, pulsing with ache. He whispered to himself, "What the hell am I turning into again?" Tommy saw the change too. He stormed into Tony's apartment one night, kicked a beer can across the floor, and grabbed him by the collar. "This ain't justice anymore, Tony. This is just rage. You're becoming the thing you said you wanted to kill." Tony shoved him back, hard. "I never said I wanted to be a hero." "No, but you fought like one. You went toe-to-toe with a goddamn world champion. You stood up. You bled clean. You inspired people, Tony. And now, you're just another thug with a hit list." Tony didn't answer, because Tommy wasn't wrong. Then came the twist no one expected. One of Vinny's own lieutenants flipped. Carlo DeMarco, mid-tier boss, smart mouth, slick suits. Always knew which way the wind blew. He showed up outside the gym ruins with a bottle in one hand and a file in the other. "Truce?" he offered. Tony didn't smile. "Or trap," Carlo shrugged. "What's the difference these days?" Tony let him in. They talked for hours. Carlo laid it out. "Vinny's panicking. He's made calls to Philly, Boston, even Miami. He's trying to find muscle to clean up this mess. But here's the kicker. He's also calling in debt favors from the old families." Tony raised an eyebrow. "You telling me he's putting out a contract?" "Not just on you," Carlo said. "On everyone tied to you. Tommy, the kids, me, probably. He's unraveling, and when a boss unravels, innocent people die." Tony downed his drink. "Then it's time to cut off the head. They called it the Night of Broken Vows. Tony and 5 men, Johnny Knuckles, Carlo, Miguel, and 2 others from the old crew, hit the Moretti compound in the north end of Newark. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress. High walls, security, cameras, steel gates. But every fortress has a crack. They came through the service tunnels, pipes and steam and darkness, until they were beneath the mansion itself. At 2:43 a.m., the lights went out. Tony was through the front door by 2:47. Gunfire echoed through the halls. Moretti guards scrambled in confusion, firing at shadows, shouting into radios. One by one they were taken down, not killed, not all, but neutralized. Tony didn't want blood, he wanted Vinny. He found him in his office, drunk, alone, staring at a wall full of old pictures, men in suits smiling, posing like royalty. Tony kicked the door open. Vinny didn't even flinch. "You made it," he muttered. Tony stepped forward, fists clenched. "You remember what I told you?" Vinny slurred. "That you were a freak show in a tuxedo? A mutt that we trained to bite on command?" Tony said nothing. "You think they love you now?" Vinny sneered. "You think those crowds will remember your name in 10 years? You're a fad, Tony, a punchline with a good chin." Tony took one more step, pulled a chair out, and sat. "No," he said. "I'm a man who stopped taking orders." Vinny leaned back, smiled. "Then kill me. Do it. Be the monster they warned me about." Tony reached into his coat, pulled out a recorder, set it on the table, and hit play. Vinny's voice, cold, calm, recorded days ago. "Put a bullet in his cousin. Burn the gym. Hell, kill the priest if you have to. I want Galento in the ground." Vinny's eyes went wide. Tony smiled. "Cops are waiting outside." Vinny lunged for a drawer. Too late. Tony was already standing, and this time, he didn't swing. Vinny Spadino was arrested that night on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and arson. The feds swarmed the compound minutes after Tony walked out. It was over. At least, the war was. The city didn't explode in celebration when Vinny Spadino was taken down. There were no parades, no champagne in the streets, just silence, thick and awkward. The kind of silence that follows a storm, when everyone peeks out their windows, not quite sure if it's really over, or if the next round of thunder is just waiting to crash. Vinny had ruled Newark's underbelly for almost 2 decades, bribed judges, paid off cops, owned businesses with invisible hands and whispered threats. So when the feds finally dragged him out in handcuffs, shirt stained with whiskey, hair messed up, screaming about setups and loyalty, the city just stood still. Because everyone knew someone had to light the match. And deep down, they all knew who did it. Tony stayed out of sight for a while after that. He didn't show up at bars, didn't walk the streets, didn't throw a parade for himself like most guys would have. No press interviews, no headline quotes, no chest thumping. He went underground, literally, into the back office of a bar owned by one of his old boxing pals, Louis Dimes. A dive joint where the jukebox only worked half the time, and the bathroom lock was a shoelace tied to a broken broomstick. But it was quiet. It was safe. And Tony needed quiet. Because for the first time in years, he was alone with his thoughts. Tommy came by after a few days, brought food, whiskey, and 2 cigars. He set everything down, sat across from Tony, and looked at him. "You gonna sit in this cave forever?" Tony lit the cigar. "Maybe." "You won." Tony puffed. "Did I?" Tommy frowned. "You got Vinny arrested. You crippled the Moretti network. You survived. You're a goddamn folk hero out there now. You know that?" Tony looked at the dust dancing in the light above the table. "I didn't do it for the glory, Tommy." "I know. I did it to stop bleeding. And now that the bleeding stopped, I don't know what to do." Tommy leaned back. "You do what most people never get a chance to do, Tony. You figure out who the hell you really are." That was the problem, though. Tony wasn't sure he liked the answer. Was he the fighter who stood toe-to-toe with a legend? Or the brute who beat information out of men in dark alleys? Was he the guy who inspired kids at the gym, or the one who let his anger turn a city upside down? Some nights he'd sit alone with a bottle, just thinking. The fight with Joe Louis. It had been the most honest moment of his life. No tricks, no favors, just fists, sweat, and willpower. But the war with the Morettis? That was the real him, wasn't it? The part he couldn't shake. The part that knew how to hurt, how to control, how to win when the world didn't play fair. So he drank. Not like before. Not to get blind. Just enough to feel something. Anything. Because in the silence, Tony Galento was haunted, not by what he'd done, but by how easy it had been to do it all again. Then, the letters started coming. Dozens of them. From kids, from veterans, from men doing time upstate, from people who'd seen him fight and saw something they recognized: struggle, pain, hope. One letter stood out. It was from a 16-year-old in Trenton, a foster kid, small, stuttering, and terrified of everything. He'd watched Tony's fight with Joe Louis on a bootleg reel at a community center. The letter said, "I ain't got a dad, I ain't got a future, but I saw you take a punch and keep going, and now I think maybe I can too." Tony folded that letter and kept it in his pocket. Didn't say much about it, but from that day on, he stopped drinking before sundown. Around that time, the city started calling again. Promoters wanted to throw Tony in another fight, not a real one, an exhibition match, flashbulbs, press, maybe even a movie deal. The fighter who took down a mob boss. Tony said no every time. He wasn't a circus act, and he wasn't looking to trade blood for glory again. But one offer did catch his attention. It wasn't for a fight, it was for a gym. The city had seized a building once owned by the Morettis, a rat hole in a bad part of town. Used to be a brothel, then a chop shop. Now it was just empty. Some councilwoman, a young firecracker named Denise Carter, wrote to him. "The neighborhood kids need something. They need someone. I can get the permits, the funding, but I need a face. I need a reason to make the city believe in this." Tony stared at the letter for a long time. He thought about the burned-down gym. He thought about the kids who used to sit on the floor, watching him wrap his hands. He thought about Rosa, the waitress, still recovering from a bullet meant for someone else. And then he picked up the phone. The place was a wreck. Roaches in the walls, holes in the roof. The floor slanted so bad it looked like it was trying to slide off the earth. But Tony didn't see trash. He saw a ring. He saw bags. He saw a future. The first few weeks were hell. Plumbing didn't work. Wiring was ancient. And every time they fixed something, something else broke. But people started showing up. Old fighters, volunteers, former cops, even some kids from the block who'd watched him fight Joe Louis. It wasn't about boxing, not really. It was about belonging, about building something that couldn't be burned down. The new gym opened 6 months later. No grand opening, no ribbon cutting, just a hand-painted sign above the door. The 12th round, named after the round Tony survived when he should have been on the floor. Inside, the walls were lined with photos, fighters, family, fallen friends. In one corner, a plaque. For everyone who ever stood up when it would have been easier to stay down. Tony taught a few classes each week. Nothing formal, no belts, just jabs, blocks, footwork, and life. He kept the fights off the street, gave the angry kids gloves and a space to let it out. Some stayed, some didn't. But every one of them left, knowing what a real punch felt like, and what it meant to take one and keep standing. One afternoon, Rosa showed up. Her arm was still stiff, but she smiled the same as she always had. "I heard you built something," she said, leaning on the doorway. Tony nodded. "Couldn't let the rats win." She handed him a pie. "Don't say I never gave you anything." He laughed. Real, honest laughter. It was the first time in a long while. The newspapers eventually moved on. Joe Louis kept winning. New champs rose. Old names faded. But in Newark, Tony Galento never disappeared. He became something else. A myth. A memory. A man who once took down a mob boss without pulling a trigger and stood 12 rounds with a champion, just to remind the world that even broken men could still fight clean. One night, long after the gym had closed, Tony sat in the ring alone, staring up at the ceiling fan spinning slow. His hands were still wrapped from earlier. Sweat clung to his shirt. His knuckles ached, not from a fight, but from showing a kid how to block without flinching. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the letter from the boy in Trenton, smoothed it out, read it again. Then he whispered, to no one, "I think maybe I can too." The gym was starting to feel like home again. Every morning, Tony would walk through the doors, flick the lights on, and let the smell of sweat and chalk hit him like a shot of espresso. Kids were showing up earlier. Some even stuck around after classes just to clean up, not because he asked, but because they wanted to. Tony wasn't just training them to fight, he was teaching them how not to break. He didn't hand out trophies. He didn't believe in wins if you didn't bleed for him. And when he stood in the middle of that ring, surrounded by the sound of fists hitting bags, laughter echoing off the walls, and the creak of old wood holding everything together, for a few hours each day, he felt whole. But peace never lasted long for men like Tony. It started with a knock on the door one rainy Thursday evening, just as Tony was locking up. He almost didn't answer. Most people knew not to come around after hours, but something about the rhythm of the knock, 3 sharp, 1 soft, pulled at something old in his gut. He opened the door and froze. She was soaked from the rain, black coat clinging to her like a second skin, hair tied back, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. But he'd know that face anywhere. Isabella Moretti, daughter of Don Emilio Moretti, niece of Vinny Spadino. Tony hadn't seen her in over 12 years. Last time was at a wedding, her sister's. Tony had been a bodyguard that night, nothing more. But he remembered how Isabella looked at him from across the room, like she saw something beneath the bruises and blood, like she knew the man buried beneath the monster. Now she was standing in front of him again, older, harder, but still carrying that same quiet fire. "Can I come in?" she asked. Tony stepped aside. He made coffee while she peeled off her wet coat and sat on the edge of the ring apron like she'd done it 1,000 times. "Still smells like leather and broken dreams in here," she said with a wry smile. Tony poured 2 cups. "That's the cologne I wear now." She took the cup, didn't sip. "I heard about the gym," she said. "About the kids, the community, all of it." Tony leaned against the post, arms folded. "And I heard your uncle put a price on my head." She flinched, just slightly. "Vinny's in prison, Tony. You made sure of that." "I didn't make sure of anything," Tony said, his voice low. "I just held up a mirror. He didn't like what he saw." They sat in silence. Then she looked up, eyes sharp. "That's why I'm here." She laid it out quick, no sugarcoating. Vinny Spadino's conviction had triggered a power struggle in the Moretti family. With their top man rotting in a federal prison, the captains were circling like vultures. Some wanted peace, some wanted war. A few were gunning to rebuild the empire, but dirtier, faster, meaner. One of them was Luca Bravetti, a name Tony knew too well. Luca wasn't just a thug, he was a butcher. The kind of guy who didn't just kill, he made a show of it. He once carved a man's face off for stealing poker money, then mailed it to the guy's sister inside a box of cannoli. Isabella leaned forward. "Luca's trying to rebuild the muscle, and he wants to start by wiping out everything tied to Vinny's embarrassment, including you." Tony exhaled through his nose. "So it's not over." She shook her head. "No, but it could be." Tony stared. "I'm listening." She reached into her bag, pulled out a thin file. Inside, names, bank accounts, phone taps, drop points, a map of Luca's operation, who he was working with, where he was vulnerable. It was everything a man like Tony could use to strike first. "You could end this now," she said. "Cut it off before it spreads." Tony looked at the file, then at her. "Why are you giving me this?" She didn't answer right away. "I'm tired, Tony," she said quietly. "Tired of blood, of fear, of watching my family rot from the inside. I tried to get out once, remember?" He nodded. She'd wanted to leave the life, go west, open a bookstore. He remembered the phone call she'd made him that night. She'd asked him to come with her. He never answered. Now here she was again, years later, offering a different kind of escape, but not for herself. For him. "You kill Luca, the rest scatter," she said. "He's not respected, just feared. You take him out and the family fractures beyond repair." Tony held the file in his hands. It felt like a weapon, a trap, a choice. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the ring, knees aching, staring at the folder. He thought about the kids who trained there, the ones who were finally starting to believe in something, the ones who walked taller now, fists up, eyes forward. He thought about Tommy, about Rosa, about the letter from the boy in Trenton. And then he thought about Luca Bravetti, a monster rising from the ashes, a man who wouldn't stop until someone stopped him. But Tony had changed, hadn't he? He wasn't the enforcer anymore. He wasn't a killer. So why did this folder feel so right in his hands? The next day, he took it to Tommy. Tommy read every page, jaw tightening with each name. each connection. "This is solid intel," he muttered. "Could bring the whole operation down." Tony nodded. "Yeah, but it's mob justice, street justice." "I know." Tommy looked up. "So what are you going to do?" Tony stared out the window. "I'm going to give him a choice." He arranged the meeting through a burner number, using a name only a few old-timers would recognize. Luca agreed. It would be on neutral ground, an old boxing gym on the south side, long since abandoned, just like Tony liked it. Tommy begged him not to go alone. "You show up with no backup, you're putting your head in a noose." Tony just smiled. "If I don't walk in there like I own the room, I don't walk out at all." Luca Bravetti was worse than Tony remembered, gaunt, scarred, eyes like a corpse. He walked with the arrogance of a man who'd never been punched in the mouth by someone who wasn't scared of him. He brought two men. Tony brought none. They met in the center of the ring, a faded mat, ropes fraying, dust hanging like smoke in the air. Tony dropped the folder on the floor between them. "Everything you've built, every contact, every drop house, every runner, I've got it all." Luca didn't blink. "So what? You think I'm afraid of a washed-up boxer and a few kids from a burned-down gym?" Tony stepped closer. "No, but I think you're afraid of being nothing, and that's what you'll be if this folder finds its way into the right hands." Luca grinned. "So this is a threat?" Tony shook his head. "It's a choice." He handed him a burner phone. "One call, you walk away, leave Jersey, disappear. I'll let you breathe. But if I see your shadow again, I'll bury it." Luca stared at the phone, then at Tony. And for the first time, Tony saw something behind those dead eyes. Doubt. He walked out of that gym without looking back. Didn't know if Luca would run or retaliate, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel dirty. He'd given a man the one thing no one ever gave him: a chance. That night, he returned to the 12th round. Kids were still training, music was playing. Tommy was yelling at a boy to stop dropping his damn hands. And for a moment, everything was okay. Tony stepped into the ring, cracked his neck, and shouted, "All right, you little punks! Who thinks they can land a jab on me?" None of them could. But they all tried. And that's what mattered. 3 days passed. No word, no retaliation, no news, no bodies, just quiet. Too quiet. Tony didn't trust it. He never had. Quiet was a lie, a trick. In the world he came from, silence wasn't peace. It was a pause between screams. The kind of quiet that made you flinch when the phone rang, that made you check the mirror twice before starting your car. Still, part of him wanted to believe. He wanted to believe that Luca Bravetti had taken the deal, that the burner phone had rung once, and Luca had answered it not with a threat or a bullet, but with a suitcase and a one-way ticket to nowhere. He wanted to believe that a man like Luca could choose fear over ego, but deep down, he knew better. At the gym, things looked normal. Kids still came, bags still swung, blood still dripped from knuckles learning discipline the hard way. Tony ran drills with two teenagers that reminded him too much of himself at 15. Angry, fast. No plan, just instinct. He taught them not how to hit, but how to stop hitting when it mattered. Tommy watched from the bleachers, arms crossed, chewing a toothpick. Every so often, his eyes drifted to the front door. "Still nothing?" he asked that Thursday night after the last kid left. Tony shook his head. "Dead air." "You think he split?" Tony leaned against the ropes, towel over his neck. "I think he's thinking." Tommy lit a cigarette, shook the match out with a flick. "I don't like thinkers. They do worse things." Tony chuckled. "That's why I kept you around." Tommy didn't smile. "What if he doesn't call?" Tony looked at him. "Then he's coming." That night, Tony couldn't sleep. He sat in his kitchen, radio low, ice melting in a glass of something stronger than coffee. The city buzzed outside. Sirens, dogs, late-night trucks rumbling down cracked streets. Newark never really slept, but it knew how to pretend. He flipped through the notebook Isabella had left with the original folder. Notes about Luca. Names, habits, safe houses. There was one spot circled 3 times. Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, an old tenement he used to crash in when he wanted to disappear. Tony kept staring at it. He didn't want to go back to hunting. But if Luca wasn't going to run, and he wasn't going to disappear, that left only one option. He was planning something. The next morning, Rosa stopped by the gym. She hadn't visited in weeks, still nursing the last of her recovery after the diner shooting. Her walk was slower, but her eyes still burned. Tony offered coffee. She sat on the bleachers and watched the kids throw jabs into the heavy bags. "I still hate boxing," she said. Tony laughed. "That makes two of us." "But I get it now." He looked at her. "It's not about the punch, is it?" He didn't answer. She pulled something from her purse, a small white envelope, no return address. It was taped to the outside of my apartment door. Tony took it, slowly, opened it. Inside, a photo, blurry, black and white, of him, sitting at the gym, from across the street. No message, no name, just a warning. That night, Tony sat with Tommy in the ring after they locked up. The lights were off except for the overhead bulb above the mat. Everything else felt like shadow. Tommy smoked, hands trembling slightly. He didn't try to hide it anymore. "They're watching again," he said. Tony nodded. Tommy looked tired, older than usual. Like the years they fought to outrun had caught up to him all at once. "We could still go to the feds," he said quietly. Tony took the photo from his coat pocket, turned it over in his fingers. "They won't help until I'm dead. And I'm not ready to give them the satisfaction." Tommy scoffed. "You'd die just to spite the law." Tony smirked. "Wouldn't be the first time." Then he got serious. "If they come here, Tommy, and I'm not around, you get the kids out. You burn the books. You make this place disappear." Tommy went still. "You're planning for death now?" Tony stared up at the ceiling fan, turning lazy circles above them. "I'm planning for them." By Sunday, the gym felt like a trap. Every time the front door creaked open, Tony's hand hovered near his hip. Every parked car across the street looked suspicious. The air felt tight, like breathing through a straw. Isabella called that night. "He hasn't run," she said. "I figured. I've heard whispers, nothing concrete, but there's talk about a meeting, a gathering. Brooklyn. Luke is calling in support." Tony was silent. "Tony, you don't have to fight this." "I already did," he said. "Now I have to finish it." She paused. You know you're not that man anymore, right?" He didn't answer, because maybe, just maybe, he still was. He drove to Brooklyn alone, didn't tell Tommy, didn't bring backup. Just him, a revolver in the glove box and a crowbar under the seat. The address was quiet. A boarded-up deli that used to sell the best damn roast beef in 3 boroughs. Now it smelled like mold and bad memories. He parked across the street, waited. At 11:07 p.m., 2 black sedans pulled up. 4 men got out, 2 more already inside. Tony waited until they went in, gave it 5 minutes, then crossed the street, crowbar in hand. The door creaked open with one push. No alarms, no sounds, just voices in the back through a set of swinging doors. Tony moved slow. 1 step, 2. He stopped outside the kitchen. He could hear Luca laughing. "He's a fossil, a relic. Guy thinks because he went 12 rounds in a ring, he's untouchable. But this time, he ain't getting back up." Tony stepped in, and everything stopped. 6 men, Luca at the center. Silence. Tony raised the crowbar and dropped it on the counter with a heavy clang. "Let's talk." Luca smiled, slow and slick. "Well, look what the cat puked up." "You watching people again?" Tony asked, "taking pictures like a fanboy?" Luca shrugged. "Just making sure you know you're still on the radar." Tony's voice dropped. "You had your choice, Luca. You could have walked. And miss all the fun." Luca leaned forward. "You think you scare me, Galento? You're a ghost, a has-been, a walking obituary. The only reason you're still breathing is because I haven't decided the flavor of your funeral yet." Tony walked closer, until they were nose to nose. Then he whispered, "You can plan the funeral. Just make sure you're in the coffin." Luca's hand moved toward his coat. Tony moved faster. Revolver, out, up, aimed at Luca's heart. "Try it," he said. Luca froze. Tony looked around at the others. "Nobody here wants to die for him," he said. "You think these guys care? They're just waiting for you to fall so they can grab what's left." One by one, the others backed away. Luca sneered. "You think this ends with me?" Tony stepped back, gun still up. "No, it ends when you stop breathing." Then he turned, walked out, gun still in hand, heart pounding, no shots fired, no blood spilled, just a message. Tony Galento was done giving second chances. By the time he got back to Newark, it was past 3 a.m. He parked in front of the gym, just sat there, staring at the building, at the flickering street lamp out front, at the mural one of the kids painted on the brick. Tony, gloves up, bruised and bloody, but still standing. He closed his eyes. And for once, no ghosts came. The days after Brooklyn were strange. For once, no retaliation came. No threats, no shadows lurking across the street, no bullets through windows or cryptic notes left on doorsteps. The neighborhood, usually heavy with tension, started to breathe again. The kids still came to the gym. Tommy barked at them like always, cracking jokes between curses. Rosa dropped off hot sandwiches twice a week and made sure Tony was eating something besides aspirin and black coffee. Even the cops, the ones who used to eye Tony like a walking felony, now nodded when they passed him on the sidewalk. It all felt steady, almost peaceful, and that's what scared Tony the most. Tommy noticed the shift in Tony's mood before anyone else. "You keep flinching like you're waiting for a lightning," he said one morning, tossing a roll of gauze at Tony. "I'm not flinching." Tommy grinned. "You flinch like a guy with a guilty conscience." Tony caught the gauze and started wrapping his hands. "I'm not guilty, I'm just not stupid." "Same difference in your line of work." Tony looked up. "You ever feel like the fight's over but you forgot to sit down?" Tommy leaned against the ring ropes, eyes squinting in the sunlight cutting through the windows. "Yeah," he said, "but usually that means round two's coming." It did, just not in the way they expected. The first crack came with a visitor. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Detective Ira Levin walked into the gym. He was clean-cut, gray at the temples, and the kind of guy who wore a badge like a loaded pistol, carefully but ready to use it. Tony was working with a kid on his jab, hands taped, sweat dripping from his brow. He saw Levin the second he stepped through the door and stopped mid-instruction. "Go hit the bag," Tony told the kid. Then he walked over to the detective. "This ain't a police gym," he said, tone flat. Levin nodded. "Good. I hate punching things." Tony didn't smile. Levin reached into his coat, pulled out a photo and handed it to him. It was a body, face down, shot twice in the back of the head, dumped in the East River. Tony stared at it. "Luca Bravetti." "Found him this morning," Levin said. "Tide rolled him in near Brooklyn Bridge." Tony didn't blink. "Shame," he said, handing it back. "That's not the part that interests me," Levin replied. Tony raised an eyebrow. Levin pulled out a second photo. This time, it was a surveillance still, grainy, low resolution, but clear enough. Tony, in Brooklyn, standing outside the boarded-up deli, gun in hand. "You want to explain what you were doing the night before Luca Bravetti ended up face down in river water?" Tony took a deep breath. "I was giving a warning." Levin studied him. "And this warning came with a gun?" Tony shrugged. "A little motivation." Levin nodded, tucked the photo away. "You got an alibi?" Tony looked him dead in the eye. "You gonna arrest me?" Levin didn't flinch. "No, not yet, but keep your phone close." Then he turned and walked out. That night, Tony sat in the ring long after the lights were off. The gym was quiet, empty. Even the city outside sounded like it had paused. He thought about Luca, about how close he'd come to pulling the trigger, about the way Luca reached toward his coat, and how close that one moment came to changing everything. But he hadn't pulled. He hadn't. And now, Luca was dead anyway. Tony didn't know what to feel. Relief? Guilt? Rage? All he knew was this. Someone finished what he started, and they did it in a way that dragged his name right into the mud. The next morning, Tommy slammed a newspaper on the counter. "Underworld shakeup. Mob lieutenant found dead. Galento denies involvement. You see this? Tommy said. You're back on the damn front page. Tony skimmed it. His name was mentioned 6 times. Local hero turned boxer turned vigilante. They made him sound like a comic book character with blood on his gloves. Tommy jabbed a finger at the article. This wasn't random. Somebody iced Luca and made sure it looked like your work. Tony nodded. I know. Tommy sat down hard on the bench. So who the hell would do that? Tony didn't answer, not out loud, but in his mind, one name crept forward like smoke. Carlo DeMarco. Carlo had gone quiet since the Brooklyn incident, which wasn't like him. Carlo thrived on being seen, the guy with the silver tongue, the tailored suits, the ever-itching ambition. He'd flipped on the Morettis after Vinny's fall, handed Tony half the intel that helped him bring the family down. But Carlo didn't do favors for free. He wanted power. He wanted to be king. And Luca had been in his way. Tony found him in a bar off Mulberry Street, the kind of place where no one asked for your last name and everyone tipped the bartender like they were hiding sins in the glass. Carlo was sipping bourbon, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Tony's car. Tony sat across from him, didn't order a drink. Carlo grinned. Tony 2-ton, thought you'd be in hiding by now. You been reading the papers? Carlo shrugged. Can't help it. You're very photogenic these days. Tony leaned forward. Did you kill him? Carlo raised an eyebrow. Luca, I thought you did. I didn't. Well, if I did, wouldn't I be the last guy to admit it? Tony's eyes didn't leave him. You framed me. Carlo smiled wider. I gave you legend. That's what you really wanted, right? Tony clenched his fists. I wanted peace. Carlo's voice turned cold. There's no peace for people like us, just quieter wars. Tony stood up. Carlo looked at him, still smiling. You kill me now, and you prove everyone right. You walk away, and you become the one thing you've always pretended not to be. Disciplined. Tony didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned and walked out, but not before saying one thing over his shoulder. You're not as smart as you think, Carlo, and you just made the same mistake as Vinny. Carlo didn't reply. The next week passed in slow motion. Detective Levin kept sniffing around. Reporters kept calling. Carlo kept acting like the king of a kingdom no one had crowned him for yet. And Tony? Tony went silent. He trained, he coached, he waited. Because he'd been in too many fights to swing first out of pride. You don't win the 12th round by throwing punches in round 5. You wait, you watch, you strike when it matters. Then, the break came. Rosa brought it. She walked into the gym carrying a manila envelope. Someone left this on my car windshield. Inside was a photo. Carlo, talking to a man in a Moretti jacket. Another photo. Carlo, shaking hands with a man listed in Isabella's folder as one of Luca's old bagmen. A note, handwritten, watch your back. He's setting you up. No signature, no prints, just proof. Tony didn't go to the cops. He didn't go to Tommy. He went back to the old warehouse, the same place where he once built a crew to take on the Morettis. But this time, he went alone. He set a chair down in the middle of the room, sat, waited. At 10:16 p.m., the back door opened. Isabella walked in. She looked tired, older, but when she saw Tony sitting there with the photos spread on the floor, she didn't flinch. She picked them up, studied them, then said, I didn't know, I swear. Tony nodded. I believe you. She looked at him. What are you going to do? Tony leaned back. I'm going to do what I should have done from the start. The chair creaked beneath Tony's weight as Isabella sifted through the photos, her hands trembling. She stopped at the last one, the one of Carlo and the bagman on the pier. The shadows in the image were long, the men blurry. But their posture, their silence, it told a story. Isabella finally spoke, voice tight. Carlo's playing both sides. Tony nodded slowly. Playing everybody. She set the photo down gently, like she was afraid it might explode. You think he killed Luca? Tony leaned forward, elbows on knees. I think he needed Luca gone. I think he needed me to look guilty. And I think he needed to rise while I took the fall. Classic play, she muttered bitterly. One boss out, another slides in before the dust settles. Tony lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the dim warehouse light. He's building something, quietly, and he wants my name buried beneath it. Isabella's voice cracked. And you're just gonna let him? Tony exhaled smoke through his nose. I gave Luca a choice. I'll give Carlo the same. She turned to him, eyes wide. You still think this can end without blood? Tony looked at her with the weariness of a man who's buried too many people. No, he said softly. I think someone's gonna bleed. I'm just trying to make sure it ain't the wrong ones. Back at the gym, things were running normal, or at least pretending to be. Tommy was pacing the floor, barking orders at a group of teens learning to pivot. Rosa was upstairs, organizing gloves, wrapping tape, brewing the world's strongest coffee. Tony walked in, and they both turned to look at him, like they knew something had shifted. Tommy waited until the kids were hitting the bags again before pulling Tony aside. I heard, he said simply. Tony didn't ask how, he just nodded. Carlo. Tommy snorted. Should have known. Slick bastard like that, always smiling too much. Like a guy who already wrote the end of the story and was just waiting for the rest of us to catch up. Tony leaned against the lockers, arms folded. He wants to be a boss. He's already acting like one. Tommy shook his head. You gonna hit him? Not yet. Why not? Tony stared across the gym, watching a kid throw sloppy hooks into the bag. Because this time, I want everyone to see it coming. Carlo's real power wasn't his fists, it was his mouth. The streets were already shifting under his influence. He'd convinced half the remaining Moretti loyalists that he was the future. Slick, modern, business savvy. Not a brute like Vinny, not a dinosaur like Tony. He promised them order, money, a quieter empire, and all he needed was Tony out of the way. So he did what the smart ones always did. He didn't send a shooter. He sent a whisper. By Thursday, the rumors had started. Tony was done. Tony was slipping. Tony was scared of cops and hiding behind his gym like a coward. Some even said he had killed Luca, that maybe he wasn't so clean after all, that maybe the redemption arc was just a mask, and the real Tony Galento was still the same thug he'd always been. Tommy punched a hole in the office wall when he heard that one. They're trying to erase you, Tony, he growled, piece by piece. If you let this go on, there won't be anything left to protect. Tony just sat quietly, reading a letter one of the gym kids had given him. Spelling mistakes everywhere, but it ended with, "Thank you for showing me how to stand up." He folded it slowly and stood. "You're right," he said. Tommy blinked. "Wait, what?" Tony's eyes were steel. "It's time people remembered who the hell I am." Tony didn't go to Carlo. He called a meeting, a public one. Well, as public as things got in the underworld. He booked a back room at Carmine's Steakhouse, the same place Vinny used to hold court in his prime. He told everyone, every lieutenant, every middleman, every small-time hustler still trying to figure out who to fear. No threats, no guns, just words. Saturday, midnight, Carmine's. The whispers turned into waves. Tony's making a move. Carlo's done. Or maybe Tony's walking into a trap. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a bet. But when Saturday night came, everyone showed up. Carmine's back room hadn't changed. The wood paneling still smelled like cigar smoke. The chandelier still buzzed. The chairs still wobbled slightly when you leaned too far back. But the room was full, wall to wall. And at the head of the long table, where Vinny once carved steak while carving out threats, Tony sat. In a plain black shirt, no suit, no jewelry, no goons at his side, just him. At 12:03 a.m., Carlo walked in. Sharp suit, smile sharper. He made a show of nodding at people, took his time, then sat across from Tony. Everyone quieted. Tony didn't stand. He just looked at the crowd. "I know you've heard things." A few chuckles, some coughs. "I know you're all waiting to see if I shoot him," Tony said, jerking his thumb at Carlo. More laughter. Carlo smirked. "But I'm not here for that. I'm here because someone's trying to rewrite history. Someone who wasn't around when the rest of us bled for these streets." Carlo leaned back. "Some of us learned how to bleed smarter." Tony nodded. "And some of us forgot what it costs when smart turns to slick." He stood now, slowly. I didn't ask to be a symbol. Didn't ask to be a story. But you all watched what I did. Not because I'm a saint, but because I kept my boots on the ground while the rest of you watched from rooftops. He pointed at Carlo. You want a boss who smiles and stabs in the same breath? You want another Vinny with better cologne? Be my guest. Then he looked at the room again. But if you want someone who remembers what it feels like to be hunted and still came out swinging, then remember this. I didn't burn down the Morettis to take a throne. I burned them down so no one else would sit on it. Silence. Then Carlo stood, clapped. Beautiful speech, he said. Real cinematic. But you forgot one thing, Tony. Tony stared. Carlo leaned in. I'm not trying to be boss. I already am. You just haven't caught up yet. Tony stepped closer. Whispers filled the room. You got something to say, Tony growled. Say it like a man. Carlo smiled. All right. Then he punched Tony. For a second, silence. Tony's lips split. Blood. A murmur in the room, but Tony just wiped it, looked at his palm, then looked at Carlo. Bad move. And then he hit back. Not a brawl, not a firefight, a fight, fists only. Two men, two visions of power, the old school versus the new slick. Tony landed the first real shot, a right hook that sent Carlo stumbling into the table. Carlo recovered, swung wild, missed. Tony countered. Left, right, elbow to the ribs. The room didn't interfere. They watched. Because this was the fight they didn't know they needed. Blood splattered the wall. Carlo tried to clinch. Tony slammed him to the ground. More hits. Until finally, Tony stopped. Carlo was coughing blood. Tony stood over him, breathing hard. This ends now, he said. Carlo looked up, one eye swollen. I'll come back. Tony shook his head. You'll crawl. He walked out of that room in silence. No cheers, no fanfare. Just respect. Raw, earned, bleeding, the same way it always came. The next morning, the bruises on Tony's knuckles felt different. Not just sore, satisfying. A dull, throbbing reminder that sometimes a man had to bleed just to remind people he was still alive. The knuckle of his right hand had split during the last punch, and now it was bandaged, stiff, and pulsing with heat. Tommy had tried to convince him to ice it after the fight, but Tony just waved him off. I want to feel it, he'd said, and feel it he did. Every throb was a memory of Carlo Bravati laid out on the floor, gasping, coughing blood, clutching his ribs like a man who realized too late that he'd poked the wrong bear. The whispers spread fast. Some said Carlo was finished, that he'd been humiliated, decrowned, defanged. Others said he was already packing to leave the state, but Tony didn't believe in clean endings, not anymore. The gym was full that afternoon. Kids throwing jabs like their lives depended on it. Tommy pacing like a war general. Rosa behind the front desk, greeting every parent and eyeing the door like a hawk. Tony sat in his usual spot, the folding chair just outside the ring ropes, a cup of bad coffee in one hand, and the letter from the Trenton kid in his pocket. The one he always kept close. The one that reminded him why he didn't just torch the whole city and walk into the dark. Tommy walked over and sat beside him. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. You think it's over? Tony didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, no. Tommy nodded. Didn't think so. That night, Tony got a call. It wasn't from a number he recognized. No name. Just static on the line for the first few seconds. Then a voice. Female. Cold. Calm. You made a mess. Tony sat up straighter. Depends who you ask. The voice didn't laugh. Carlo's not done. Tony narrowed his eyes. Then he should have stayed down. A pause. Then, he's meeting with new backers, out-of-towners, guys who don't care about legacy, just money. You beat him in front of the city, but they saw opportunity in that weakness. They think you've softened. Tony clenched his jaw. Who are you? I'm someone who believes in balance, the voice said. And right now, things are tilting again. Then the line went dead. Tony sat there for a long time, staring at the receiver. Out-of-towners, new blood. He'd seen it before. The vultures that moved in after a king fell, ready to snatch what was left of the carcass. And Carlo? If he couldn't be the man on top, he'd settle for being the hand behind the man, pulling strings, whispering orders, surviving in the shadows, which meant one thing. Tony's fight wasn't over. It had just changed shape. 2 nights later, he confirmed it. Isabella met him at a diner outside Jersey City. She slid into the booth wearing dark shades and a coat pulled too tight for the warm night. "You look like you're hiding," Tony said. "I am," she replied, "because I stuck my neck out for you and Carlo knows it." Tony sipped his coffee. "He's talking to outsiders?" She nodded. "Philly guys, one from DC too. He's trying to rebuild, fast, quiet. The kind of operation that doesn't care about neighborhoods, tradition, or rules. Just clean money, fast turnover, and disposable men." Tony rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This city's bled enough." Isabella leaned in. "Then you better bleed it first, or it's going to rot from the inside again." Tony spent the next few days gathering information the old way, through whispers, favors, and people who owed him silence. He didn't want another war, but if one was coming, he'd damn sure be ready. Tommy helped where he could, but Tony started keeping some of the work quiet, not because he didn't trust Tommy, but because the fewer people involved, the fewer pieces the city could break apart. By Friday, Tony had a list. 3 names. Marco No Ears Russo, a Philly lieutenant known for arms smuggling and cutting off ears for intimidation. Riley Knox, an ex-federal turned fixer, running connections between cities like a broker of sins. And Anthony Velasquez, a quiet hitter from DC, known for cleaning house when things got messy. Carlo was dealing with these men. That wasn't rebuilding. That was surrendering his city to outsiders. Tony looked down at the names, then circled them with a pen. Time to send another message. He waited until Sunday. That's when Knox was expected to show up at a club downtown, a front for a business conference the underworld had been buzzing about for days. Tony didn't bring a crew. No disguises. He walked in wearing his name, his face, and a stare that could split bricks. The bouncer didn't stop him. Knox was in a private booth, laughing too hard, glass of scotch in one hand, cigar in the other. Tony didn't wait for the introduction. He walked straight up and said, "You're sitting in a dead man's seat." Knox blinked. "Excuse me?" Tony grabbed the glass and poured it on the table, then sat down across from him. "This city's already buried one boss. Don't make me add your name to the wall." Knox looked amused. "You threatening me?" "I'm warning you," Tony said. "I don't care where you came from. You set up shop here, I'll tear it down with my bare hands." Knox's smile faded. "You don't run Newark." Tony leaned forward. "I am Newark." He didn't kill anyone that night. He didn't need to. By the next morning, Knox was on a train back to DC. Russo never even showed. And Velasquez, Tony sent him a single bullet in a red envelope. Message received. The city took a breath again, but Tony didn't. He stood in the gym, watching the kids punch bags, watching Rosa laugh behind the desk, watching Tommy bark and curse like everything was fine. But he knew better. Because now he'd done something worse than violence. He'd made people believe. And when people believed in you, they expected you to survive. One evening, long after the kids had gone home, Tony sat in the ring by himself. The lights were low. The ropes creaked when he leaned back. His hands were wrapped, even though he hadn't sparred all day. Tommy walked in quietly and tossed him a beer. Tony caught it, cracked it open, didn't drink. "You're not sleeping," Tommy said. Tony didn't argue. Tommy sat on the steps of the ring. "You planning something I should be scared of?" Tony finally spoke. "I'm planning not to die. That count?" Tommy shrugged. "Barely." They sat in silence, then Tommy said, "You think you'll ever stop fighting?" Tony stared at the ceiling. "No." "Why not?" Tony leaned back, arms over the ropes, "Because someone's always coming." It was a Wednesday when Tony first felt it, that creeping, invisible pressure in the room. Not from a threat, not from the streets. This was different, more personal, more familiar. The kind of weight that didn't come from a stranger's fist, but from a look that lingered too long. A pause in conversation, a silence where words should have been. Tommy had been off lately. Not outright strange, not suspicious, just off, distracted, late to the gym, losing track of training drills. Forgetting names he used to shout over the bags. Tony told himself it was age, stress, the years finally catching up. But in this life, paranoia wasn't a weakness, it was a survival tool. So Tony started watching. That Friday, he left the gym early, told the kids he had business across town. Rosa shot him a look. She didn't buy it, but she didn't press either. Tony waited until the gym emptied out, then circled back. Quiet, careful. He watched from across the street, blending into the shadows of a bodega awning. At 9:17 p.m., Tommy stepped out of the gym. Alone. He wasn't carrying gym bags. He wasn't locking the door behind him. He was just walking casually, like a man who had somewhere he shouldn't be going. Tony followed at a distance, 2 blocks, then 4, then down into a narrow alley behind a boarded-up restaurant. And there, in the glow of a flickering streetlight, Tommy met with someone. Tony stayed far back, couldn't hear everything, but he saw enough. A folder exchanged, a handshake that lingered too long, a nod, like an understanding was made, and then the man disappeared into the dark. Tommy stood alone for a moment, then lit a cigarette with shaking hands. When he walked back out to the street, his eyes darted left, then right. He never saw Tony watching. Back at the apartment, Tony didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, cigarette burning into ash, heart beating louder than any footsteps he'd ever heard in a back alley. Tommy. The man who'd been with him since the beginning, who iced his knuckles, who wrapped his ribs after the Joe Louis fight, who'd told him to get clean, then helped him stay that way. Now, walking into shadows Tony had once burned down. He didn't want to believe it, but belief was a luxury long gone. The next day, Tony didn't confront him. He trained like normal, laughed with the kids, took a few body shots in sparring, told Rosa her coffee was still better than half the city's restaurants, even if it burned the back of his throat. But every time Tommy walked by, Tony's eyes followed. He didn't say a word. He just watched. It was Rosa who cracked first. Late that night, after the gym emptied out, she found Tony sitting in the ring, elbows on his knees, looking like a man waiting for the pass to tap him on the shoulder. "You look like you've already been hit," she said, stepping inside the ropes. Tony didn't look at her. "Feels like it." She sat across from him. And then she said something that cut deeper than any punch. It was Tommy. Tony's eyes slowly turned to her. "I didn't want to believe it," she said, voice shaking. "But I saw the same guy, the one from the photos you got, the guy with Carlo's old crew. He met Tommy last week too. Same alley." Tony's jaw clenched so tight it cracked. "He say anything to you?" "No, but he's been off, real off. Won't look me in the eye, started avoiding the gym cameras, leaves early, comes late. And the books?" Tony blinked. "What about them?" "I ran the numbers this morning. A couple thousand missing from the community pot, the one we keep for the kids' gear." Tony rubbed his face, like trying to wake from a nightmare. "Jesus Christ." "Tony," she said quietly, "I think they paid him, and I think it wasn't just money." He didn't sleep that night. Didn't eat, didn't drink. He just sat at the edge of his bed, replaying every memory, every laugh, every fight, every long night cleaning up the gym, every quiet conversation over whiskey and regret. All of it now stained, all of it now in question. By morning, Tony made his decision. He waited until Saturday night, the gym's slowest day. Only 2 kids were on the floor, throwing half-hearted hooks while Rosa swept the office. Tommy walked in around 7 p.m., wearing his old windbreaker and carrying a box of new hand wraps. Tony nodded at him from the ring. "Need to talk." Tommy gave a weak smile. "Talk or yell? Depends what I hear." Tommy stepped into the ring, sat across from him, just like always. And for a moment, it felt normal. Just 2 old wolves sharing silence. Then, Tony dropped the folder on the mat. Photos, receipts, time-stamped footage. Tommy looked down at them, didn't touch them, didn't speak for a long while. Then he whispered, "I never wanted it to go this far." Tony's voice was gravel. But it did, Tommy nodded. They offered me something, Tony. Not just cash, protection. I thought, maybe I could keep you safe by working both sides, feed them just enough to stall. But then it changed. Carlo started demanding more. Names, routes, access, and I was already in too deep to back out. Tony didn't blink. You were my brother. Tommy's eyes welled. I never meant for you to be in danger. I swear to God, Tony, I didn't. I just thought if I played the game, I could control the board. You think I need saving? Tommy looked down. I think maybe I needed something to hold on to. I was tired, Tony. You still had fight in you. I was running on fumes. Silence filled the ring like smoke. Tony stood, walked to the ropes, then turned back. You got 3 options, he said quietly. Leave, never come back, and this place forgets your name. Tommy swallowed. Or I hand this folder to Levin, and you rot with Carlo's new crew in federal custody. Tommy stood, shaking. And the third? Tony looked him dead in the eyes. You put on gloves, and we settle this in the ring. Rosa found Tony in the locker room an hour later, bloodied, breathing hard, sitting on the bench alone. Where is he? She asked. Tony didn't look up. He left. Which option? Tony closed his eyes. I let him walk. That night, Tony sat in the ring again, alone, bruised, tired, older than he felt, and angrier than he wanted to admit. He didn't regret letting Tommy walk. But he hated that the person who knew him best knew exactly how to cut him, from the inside. The next morning, a letter was taped to the gym door, written in Tommy's shaky, familiar handwriting. Tony, you were right to call me out. I let fear run the show. I didn't deserve to stand in that ring with you, not after what I did. But I want you to know one thing. I never stopped believing in you. You were always the fighter. I was just the guy who held the towel. Keep standing, brother. Tony folded the letter, put it in his coat pocket next to the one from the boy in Trenton, then opened the doors to the gym, because it was Monday, and people were still watching. The city had changed, or maybe Tony had. He stood in the gym's front doorway just after sunrise, coffee in one hand, coat over his shoulders, watching Newark slowly crawl awake. The street lamps flickered out one by one. Delivery trucks groaned past. A woman walked her kid to school, their hands locked, the boy swinging his backpack like it had no weight. Peace, not loud, not dramatic, just there, soft and fragile. Tony didn't trust it, but he didn't hate it either. It had been a week since Tommy left. No one knew the full story. Not Rosa, not the kids, just Tony and the letter. The only trace left of him was a fading echo in the locker room, the corner where he used to sit, taping knuckles, muttering jokes between curses. Now it was empty, and the emptiness made too much noise. Still, Tony hadn't changed the routine. He opened the gym every morning at 6 a.m. He swept the floors himself. He checked the books Rosa updated every night, not because he didn't trust her, but because numbers calmed him. They didn't lie. They didn't twist. They were clean. That week, the gym was busier than ever. Word of what happened at Carmine's had made the rounds. The underground respected it. The neighborhood admired it. The kids, they worshipped it. But none of them knew what Tony felt. Tired, not just in the body, in the soul. He'd climbed the mountain, beat the odds, outlasted the mob, buried his enemies and forgiven his brother. And now, he just stood there, a fighter with no one left to punch. Maybe it's time, Rosa said one night, handing him a bowl of chili and sitting across from him in the office. Time for what? He asked, though he already knew. To stop, to leave it behind. Let it breathe without you. This place doesn't need a fighter anymore, Tony. It needs a builder. Tony chewed, swallowed, wiped his mouth. I don't know how to build, Rosa gave him a look. You built this. He looked around, the scuffed walls, the patched bags, the photos of champions and street kids lining the edges of the ring. He had built it, not with hammers, but with sweat, rage, and stubbornness. But walking away, that was something else entirely. Later that night, he stood in the ring alone. No lights except the one overhead buzzing softly like a tired bee. He threw a few lazy jabs, nothing hard, just movement, muscle memory. Then he stopped, stared at his own fists, scarred, swollen, but still his. He remembered every fight, the illegal brawls, the night in Madison Square Garden with Joe Louis, the Moretti enforcers in alleyways, Carlo's blood on the floor at Carmine's. All of it had come down to these two fists. And for the first time in his life, Tony asked himself something that scared the hell out of him. Who am I without them? The next morning, he got a visitor. Not Rosa, not Tommy. Detective Ira Levin. He walked into the gym like a man who knew he didn't belong but didn't care. The kids stared. Rosa tried to intercept him, but Tony waved her off. "It's all right," he said. Levin looked around, nodding slightly. "Place has come a long way." Tony sipped his coffee. "You here for the tour?" Levin pulled out a folder, thin, light. "Carlo's gone." Tony blinked. "Gone where?" "Miami. Caught a plane out 2 nights ago. New identity, new name, old habits." Tony didn't say anything. Levin continued. "He got spooked. The word is, after you cleaned out his muscle and stared him down at Carmine's, he figured the streets weren't his anymore." Tony finally spoke. "So what's in the folder?" Levin handed it to him. "Proof." Tony flipped through it. Surveillance photos, wire transcripts, financial trails. "You want me to go public?" he asked. Levin shook his head. "No, I want you to rest. You earned it." Tony raised an eyebrow. "And since when does a cop care about my rest?" Levin hesitated, then said, "Because even if you were dirty once, you did something none of us could. You broke the spine of a criminal empire and lived." He paused. "That don't happen much." Tony nodded. "So now what?" Levin shrugged. "Now you get to decide if you want to be more than the guy who survived." Then he left. And Tony stared at the folder for a long time. The next week was quieter. No new threats, no mysterious calls. He focused on the gym. Rosa helped design a new training program, discipline and education side by side. If a kid missed school, he missed gym. No exceptions. Tony started holding classes for older teens, not just fighting, but control. How to walk away, how to breathe, how to think before swinging. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled more than he scowled. But it wasn't until the letter arrived that he realized what came next. It was a white envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo, him, shirtless in the ring, raising a kid's hand after a sparring win. And a note. "You proved them wrong. You don't have to keep fighting to matter. Maybe now it's time to teach." No signature. But the handwriting? Tommy. Tony sat down with the photo, and something shifted. A decision. He called a press conference the next day. Nothing fancy. Just reporters, city officials, and a crowd of gym regulars standing outside the building. Tony stood in front of the sign, the 12th round, in a clean suit, no tie, hands folded in front of him. Rosa stood to his right. Levin, surprisingly, stood to his left. Tony took the mic. "I'm not good at speeches," he began. "I'm better at jabs." Laughter. Nervous but real. "I've spent most of my life fighting, in rings, in streets, in the dark corners where no one keeps score. I've been a villain, a hero, a headline, and sometimes a ghost." He looked out over the crowd. "But today, I'm making one last swing, and it ain't with my fists." He held up a document. "This gym will no longer be just a gym. Starting this summer, we'll launch the Galento Youth Foundation. Training, mentorship, education, a path away from gangs, away from violence, towards something better." Applause broke out. Tony nodded. "And I won't be running it forever. One day someone else will take the gloves, maybe one of the kids in this crowd, maybe one of you." He stepped back. "And when they do, I'll be watching. Not as a fighter, not as a boss, but as a man who finally figured out how to build." That night, Tony sat on the gym roof, watching the city breathe below. Rosa brought him a drink, not whiskey, just soda. She sat beside him, quiet. After a while, she said, "You think Tommy'll come back?" Tony shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. But you forgave him?" Tony looked out over the rooftops. "I had to. Otherwise, I'd never be free." She smiled. "You're changing." Tony chuckled. "Took me long enough." They sat in silence. Then she asked, "So what now?" Tony sipped his drink. "Now?" he said. "Now we wait for the next fight." She looked worried. "But I thought it was over." Tony turned to her. "It's never over," he smiled. "But at least now, I know I don't have to face it alone." It was raining the morning Tony got the call. A slow, heavy kind of rain that made the city feel like it was sinking into the pavement. He sat by the gym window, mug of black coffee in his hand, steam rising like ghosts. Rosa was sorting boxing gloves behind the counter. The kids would be arriving in an hour. Then the phone rang. Old, wired, clunky. No one ever called it anymore. Tony picked it up. A pause, then a voice. "He's back." That was all. Click. By noon, Tony was in the car. He didn't tell Rosa where he was going, didn't pack, didn't call Levin. He just grabbed his coat, slipped the old revolver into the glove box. Not because he planned to use it, but because there were places you didn't walk into empty-handed. He drove out past the edge of Newark, past the strip malls, warehouses, and quiet skeletons of factories long gone, to the last place he ever thought he'd go again. The docks. The same docks where deals had been made, bodies had been dumped, and whispers had become wars. And there, leaning against a rusted shipping container, was Tommy. Older, thinner. But he didn't look surprised to see Tony. Tony stepped out of the car, slow. The rain soaked into his coat immediately. "You really came back," he said. Tommy nodded. "Wasn't sure I would." Tony stopped a few feet away. The wind howled between them. "Why now?" he asked. Tommy reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I got this," he said. 2 weeks ago." He handed it over. Tony opened it. A photo, a kid, maybe 14, bruised, bloodied, standing outside a rundown boxing gym in Philly. On the back, a note. "The Galento model is spreading, but not everyone uses it the same way." Tony felt something sharp twist in his chest. He looked at Tommy. "They're copying it," Tommy said. "Your idea, but they're corrupting it. Training kids for the wrong reasons, turning gyms into recruitment zones. You shut down one war, Tony, but the fire spread." Tony exhaled slowly. "And you want to stop it?" Tommy nodded. "I owe you that much." Tony folded the photo, pocketed it. "I didn't come here for another war." Tommy gave a sad smile. "Doesn't matter. It came for you." Back in Newark, the gym buzzed. News spread fast. Tony and Tommy were together again. The kids couldn't believe it. Rosa didn't speak for a full 10 seconds before muttering, "I'll be damned." But this time, Tommy didn't slide back into old habits. He stayed quiet, humble. He cleaned gear, ran drills, avoided the cameras. And when Rosa finally confronted him in the office, he looked her straight in the eye and said, "I'm not trying to be forgiven. I'm trying to be useful." And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, the foundation grew. Word got out, Newark's hardest was building something clean, legit. Donations came in, volunteers signed up. Even Levin stopped by with a nod and a rare smile. "Guess you're going to put me out of work." Tony laughed, but deep down, he knew the war wasn't over, because a whisper had reached him from Philly, a name, Dante Vega, a former enforcer, smart, ruthless, young, too young. He'd opened 3 gyms in the last year, all mimicking Tony's methods. But instead of helping kids, he was grooming them. Soldiers in streetwear, discipline on the surface, desperation underneath. And people were starting to say he was the new Galento. Tony couldn't let that stand. One Saturday afternoon, as kids wrapped their hands and trainers yelled over hip-hop beats, Rosa walked into the office and found Tony staring at a map. Pins, notes, strings. "Philly?" she asked. Tony nodded. "Don't," she said gently. "Don't get pulled back in." "This ain't about me," he replied. "It's about what comes next." She sat beside him. "Then send someone else." Tony looked at her. "There is no someone else." But there was. He just hadn't been ready to say it out loud. Not until now. That night, Tony and Tommy sat in the ring, the gym dark and quiet. Tony finally said what he'd been holding in for weeks. "I want to retire." Tommy blinked. "You mean, for real?" Tony nodded. "Yeah, not because I'm scared, not because I lost, but because I won, and I don't want to lose that." Tommy looked at him for a long time. "Who takes over?" Tony smiled. "You." There was silence. Then Tommy stood, paced. "You trust me with that?" "I trusted you with my life," Tony said, "even after everything." Tommy sat down again, shaking his head. "I don't deserve it." "None of us do," Tony replied. "That's why it works." The next day, he made it official. He handed the keys to Tommy, signed the paperwork, moved his things into a small second-floor apartment a few blocks away. And that night, for the first time in nearly 30 years, he didn't go back to the gym. He sat by his window, poured himself a glass of water, and stared out at the skyline. No noise, no ghosts, just silence and peace. Weeks passed. Tony visited, but less often. Tommy ran the place well, tough but fair. Rosa stayed. The kids adapted. The Galento Youth Foundation spread to 3 cities, Philly, Trenton, even Atlantic City. Every gym had a plaque on the wall. 12th round. It's not about the knockdown, it's about the get-up. But Tony still had one visit left in him, to Philly. He didn't tell anyone, just woke up one morning, packed a bag, and drove. He found Dante Vega's gym in the North End. Brand new, neon lights, chrome dumbbells, loud music. But what hit him hardest were the eyes of the kids inside. Hollow, aggressive, hungry, not learning to fight, learning to harm. Tony stood outside the door for a long time. He didn't go in. He didn't need to. Instead, he wrote a letter. To the next fighter, don't build your house on pain. Don't raise kids on anger. Teach them to win, but more importantly, teach them how to walk away. The streets don't need another gangster. They need leaders. Fight for something better. Tony Galento. He mailed the letter, returned home, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel unfinished. That summer, the gym held a ceremony. Rosa, Tommy, the kids, even Levin and a few neighborhood legends were there. A giant mural was unveiled on the west wall. Tony, arms raised, gloves off, standing not over a knocked-out opponent, but holding a kid's hand in the air. And underneath, one sentence. He never stopped swinging until he gave us something worth fighting for. Tony stood at the edge of the crowd. No speeches, no spotlight. Just watching. Rosa came up beside him. "You ready to disappear?" she asked. Tony smiled. "Not disappear," he said. "Just fade into the corner. Let the next kid step forward." She bumped his shoulder. "Proud of you," he nodded. "Me too." And that night, in his small apartment, Tony finally packed the old gloves away. Not to hide them, but to honor them. He placed them in a wooden box, closed the lid, slid them into the closet. Then he lay down. And for the first time in his long, bloody, beautiful life, he slept without a fight, waiting on the other side.